This is your reminder that the BBC has yet to address the consistent transphobic leanings in its news coverage, and while the team behind Doctor Who is not connected to this in any way since this is a BBC-owned property, I'm going to keep pointing it out until the problem gets resolved. Links in a pinned comment below if you don't know what I'm talking about. I'll stop saying it when it stops being a problem. I always do like a good story. And it's usually a good thing to be left wanting more. Doctor Who reviews continue. The story and the engine. I was excited for this one. The little glimpses we got from it made it seem like it had an awful lot of potential to be the kind of weird that when Doctor Who does it, I really like. And I do really like this. With one primary overriding note about it. Stick a pin in that, though. We'll come back to it, and I suspect I'll probably talk about it for a while, but let's start with the basics up front. Not a lot of Belinda in this one. In and of itself, for the purposes of this story, honestly, it's fine. It's a little bit concerning within the larger scope of the season. I'm starting to worry that my main takeaway from Gatwa is that I'm not going to feel as close to him as the Doctor as I would like or potentially could, simply because I really worry about him not building a strong, firm, stable relationship with a companion. I've mentioned elsewhere that a big part of how I relate to the Doctor, any given Doctor, is the kind of relationship that the Doctor will build with a companion. And the ones who I feel like don't really have a strong, really well built, really well established, interesting dynamic with a companion are the ones I tend to have a harder time relating to as a result. And as charismatic as Gatwa is, and actually as good as the characters of both Belinda and Ruby are in a vacuum, like they're good companions, it's just the connection between, and like, it's not like they don't have performance chemistry, they do, it's just that relationship doesn't really feel like it's being built very much. Again, not really an issue within this story, but taken within the scope of the show, especially given that we only have 8 episodes per season, which is nowhere near enough, but I talked about that last year, and my thoughts have not changed. In fact, they've solidified, so you can check out that video to hear my thoughts on that. But yeah, not a lot of her in this, and while she does show up on the back end, this obviously isn't a story where the focus is going to be her. And I actually kind of appreciate the moment that, you know, she accepts the Doctor really wants to stop off at this barbershop, and she's just like,
go on then. Take as long as you need.
And it gets sort of reiterated and circled back to later when someone's like, oh, he dragged you here. And she's like, no, I told him to go. That is an aspect of their dynamic that is more interesting. But again, I'd love to see more exploration of it than we've been getting. The setting feels very well put together. I can't speak to the authenticity of it. Obviously, I have never been to Nigeria, but it certainly had a very authentic feel and flavor to it from my inexpert point of view. If anybody with actual knowledge wants to pick apart the depiction, have at it. I won't stop you. But to my uneducated eyes, it felt, you know, that sort of, yeah, it's a little crowded, it's a little busy, it's a little bustling, but it also at the very time just felt very alive. And it had a different energy than I think I would have felt with just, you know, a crowded market in an area that I actually have some familiarity with. It came across really well, I think. The characters in the barbershop. We have Omo, who is one of the ones we get the most time with. And also, like, I just overall really like the notion of this dynamic that the Doctor keeps coming back to swap stories with Omo, partially because this was one of the first places where he felt a kind of connection. It's talked about a little bit in the TARDIS before he leaves. And it's actually really interesting that he kind of, he talks about finding Black community.
In Africa, in that barber shop, I'm accepted.
And sort of acknowledging that that was not something he'd had to do before. It's actually even worth thinking back if you pay attention to Dot and Bubble when, the realization comes of the white supremacists that he's been trying to save and how they respond to him now that they are out of immediate danger and have no more use for him. You can actually see Ruby kind of catch on just a little bit before him, which under other circumstances, I might be like, why are you having the white person realize it before the Black person? But it does actually make a certain amount of sense, given that she grew up with a Black mother effectively in a Black family, and she is born witness, not been the direct subject, I'm sure, but she is born witness to a lot more of this stuff, whereas the Doctor hasn't. But now that he has, and he's had experiences like Dot and Bubble, the idea of him finding community with Black people around something as quintessential as the barber shop. Now, again, I can only speak from my perspective, which is rather white, but certainly in terms of depictions and what I have heard Black people and Black cultural analysts talk about the experience of the barbershop, and especially as a place for men to be able to relax and come into actual physical contact with other men and not have it have the sort of smell of, don't get too close, don't get emotional, that sort of buttoned up masculinity that is expected of men of most races. But I have in the past had people describe to me the idea of the barbershop as a safer place for masculine bonding for Black men. That's not to say there's never any toxicity in that. You can get toxicity in literally any group of any color, of any gender. But it is a more relaxed and less buttoned up setting for a lot of people who sometimes don't have other outlets where they feel like they can just bond and get close to people, where they don't also have to be doing something else, where they aren't bonding over sports. They're not bonding over, even necessarily like a shared interest, like a geekdom or something like that. They're just able to sit and talk and share stories and just be. And the idea of the Doctor really finding kind of a refuge in that felt really good. And I think it was a really important thing to do, because I think it would have been possible for the Doctor to have this sense of community with Black people that wouldn't hold up to scrutiny. Like if it just seemed like, oh yeah, of course he just fits in here. It's like, should he though? Like, given that, for at least as far as what has been shown in his television life, he doesn't have a ton of experience in being Black, and what little bit we have seen, he doesn't remember. That's also something we'll come back to on this. But the little explanation we get in the TARDIS of him finding Omo and finding this connection and being welcomed into that aspect of Black community, yeah, that felt really well earned and a really good fitting him into something that might otherwise have seemed a little bit like, should he be slotting in that easily though? Because we get just enough backstory where, yeah, this fits really well. So let's talk a little bit about the barber, our villain. I find him quite interesting. First of all, the performance is rather good. He's quite intimidating. Apparently, this is actually the same actor who played the Lion-O-looking guy back in Series 9. They made a mistake burying him under facial prosthetics last time. There's a lot that he's able to bring across with his face. And there is a sense of intimidation, but also at times almost desperation, especially when the Doctor challenges him. And I also kind of like how it skirts around the idea of Anansi, which is something that I know a little bit about, primarily through how the folkloric figure was used in Gaiman works, unfortunately. But I do know a little bit about Anansi, and I also generally know it's always a little bit of a dicey thing to start taking very specific, very culturally specific folklore aspects and start putting them into even fantasy, but especially sci-fi stories, where it's liable to get explained. Um, I like what they did here, which is that he does try and claim that, like, I am Anansi, and I am Dionysus, and I am Saga, and I'm all these, these Loki and these tricksters, these stories, these gods of stories. They're all me. And the Doctor challenges him on that, which gets a really interesting reaction from him. Again, really well played. And instead, it becomes a matter of, okay, no, I'm not, which I think does a lot to avoid issues of potentially disrespecting cultural traditions and beliefs, because it's like, no, we're not literally taking your belief and turning it into this guy, but we are connecting it to that through the overall theming of stories and storytelling and the power of stories, which I, again, from my distanced white perspective of things, it does feel like it works pretty well. And this general idea of he is the storyteller, but he isn't remembered, only the stories are. That is an interesting thing for someone to hold a grudge against, especially if he feels unappreciated by the people and the beings empowered, if not created, by the stories that he told. They came into being and they don't need him anymore. He is forgotten and the stories live on. He wants credit. And he wants more than that. He wants revenge, and a kind of revenge that will result in the kind of damage that the Doctor can allow to happen. But there is that moment towards the end where he's like,
all I wanted was to be credited for my work.
You wanted more than that, but I do believe that at the heart of what he was doing was that initial slight. Nobody knows I did this. Everyone knows what I did, but nobody knows I did it. And while, there's sort of the philosophical ideal of like, well, if my ideas live on, isn't that enough? Well, if you actually keep existing to watch the stories you told get retold and changed and reworked over and over and over again, and nobody remembers you, I can imagine that being a little bit of a wound on you that festers over time, over multiple lifetimes at this point. So I thought the idea of him was quite interesting. And like, as cheesy as it was, I kind of liked the little line about the World Wide Web. It's like, that's what I called it. And then they called something way worse that. So, I don't know. That was a small moment. I just liked that. The telling of the stories and the way they get visualized, I really like. I like it a whole bunch visually, but also I really love when a piece of visual media like this, whether it's TV or movies or what have you, when it has the strength of its convictions to just have characters sit down, maybe with a little visualization, but are basically just having characters sit down and telling a story. That takes a lot of confidence in what you're doing. You see it a lot more in stage plays where trying to visualize what the story is being about, is a lot harder, and in some cases not even possible, depending on what the story is. But in a medium like TV or movies, there's always the thing, oh, well, like, show, don't tell. Like, don't just have someone tell a story, show people that. And the thing is, show, don't tell is a really good rule of thumb, except sometimes telling is more important and sometimes telling is better, especially if what is being told and the way it's being told tells you something about who's telling it. If the important part is not just the relaying of information, but also what it reveals about the teller of the story, then yeah. Like, my go-to example of this is Jaws and Quint talking about what happened to him on the USS Indianapolis. And that is just him talking. There's no flashbacks, there's no sound effects, implying, what happened at the time. It's just one man telling this story, and it's so powerful. And it's hard. It's hard. You need such a good performer, and you need someone who can really command the camera through their voice, through their appearance, to whatever extent any of this is being used. And you need a director and a crew who are willing to have faith that this will work. And sometimes it doesn't, but when it does, it's wonderful. And I really, really liked it here. I wanted more. Which does bring me to my big overriding criticism and the sort of sub aspects of it that I'm going to go into. I want this to be a two-parter so badly. I can feel it in my bones. I want this to be a two-parter. I want more time. I want more time with these characters, one in particular, which I haven't really brought up yet, I'll get to. But I want more time with these characters. I want more time with the setup. And more than anything, I want more stories. Not just because the stories were good, they were, but also just because I wanted to get to know these characters better through the stories they chose to tell and how they chose to tell them. Like the Yo-Yo Ma story was wonderful because not only is it just a fun story no matter how you tell it, but also it really gives you insight into an aspect of this culture that does not have the global recognition of the Western notions of, write it down, record it, preserve it exactly the same every time, where these notions of a living history, an oral history, where things will change. It's not going to be the same. Why should it be the same? And tying that idea into this story and then tying it into a casual thing that was said earlier in the episode.
He doesn't know. He never makes appointments.
Yes, besides, appointments never work in Africa.
What are you talking about?
That is why we say we will come at 1, but won't arrive till 3. So, appointments, bad idea.
Was just so beautiful. And not to mention, it ties into the larger thematics of storytelling, where the idea of remembering the storyteller is only ever going to happen in a system where the stories are locked. If they never change, then you can credit who wrote it. But if it changes with every telling, that's not even a concept. And I feel like if this had had the time to relax and be a two-parter, I feel like the point could have been made that most of the really famous writers that we know of, your Shakespeare's, your Chaucer's, your Homer's, your Virgil's, are from Western cultures. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. Because those are the cultures that were all about writing it down and locking it in, saying there is one version of events and we say what it was, as opposed to cultures where not only does it change with each telling, it's supposed to. It's a feature, not a bug. And I really would have loved to have seen that explored a little bit more. But even though it wasn't, just seeing that this story about Yo-Yo Ma tied into that idea and those themes, it's so good. And I want more. Now, I mentioned one of the reasons I want more of these stories is I want to get to know these characters better, because this is a very well-performed supporting cast in terms of all the guys in the barbershop. There is a different sense from each of them. They have terrific performance chemistry. They have a very relaxed feeling between each other. You really get that sense of established dynamics. I would love to have gotten to know them more through what stories they told and how they told them. I've mentioned actually just a couple of videos ago that when I watched The Well, I found myself thinking about how that supporting cast was a little bit underserved, partly because it was too big. That's not really the case here, but one of the things I compared it to was the Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit, which has one of my all-time favorite supporting casts. And part of the reason that they are so good is because you really get the time to know them. And that's actually true of a lot of two-parters. A lot of the best supporting casts are in two-part stories. The Library two-parter is another one. Human Nature and the Family of Blood had a really good supporting cast. And having more time with these people can really flesh them out and give them more weight. And I really think that these characters, these guys in the barbershop, have the background and the strength of the performance to be more. There just isn't time for it. The other character who I think really could have benefited from more time is Abena, who I haven't really talked about up to this point. She has a little bit of backstory, and again, sort of tying things into Anansi, and she has a history with the Doctor. hold on to that. I'll come back to it. I've been saying that about a fair bit, but like I will. I promise. I'm already starting to circle back onto things. And I don't want to say that the resolution itself is rushed in terms of the disabling of the engine and getting the guys out and all that, but the turn from her, from adversary to ally to the Doctor, that felt slightly rushed. It's a pretty common thing for me to feel like a face turn from a villain can feel rushed if I don't know that character well enough to understand why it is that they'd be doing this. And unfortunately with her, I kind of don't. Now, I don't want to say that it's like, it's out of character. No, the thing is, I don't know her enough to know if it's out of character. It becomes one of those things where what I had kind of understood and assumed of her character up to this point, it isn't contradicted by her turning against the barber, but that is sort of information that I wouldn't have realized until she just did it. And so suddenly I have to go, oh, I thought I understood you. Now you just did something that doesn't fit my previous understanding of you. So I guess I have to integrate that into this new understanding of you. So like, I still get there in the end, but it does result in a little bit of time where I'm like, oh, okay. That kind of came out of nowhere when it didn't really. Now, like, these kinds of face turns can feel like they come out of nowhere. The all-time worst is the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes movies, because there's a character in that who abandons his lifelong, absolutely fervently held religious beliefs over the span of like 10 seconds.
Everything I have believed is a lie.
Like, there's so much wrong with that movie, and that's probably the least of its issues, but holy crap, does that bug the hell out of me. So, like, this isn't that. This is nowhere near that. But I think getting to better know her as a character, which is another thing that the episode just doesn't really have time for, could have made that shift more natural and a little bit less of a jarring moment for me. Let's touch on Jo Martin, the fugitive doctor. What a beautiful use of her. I love this use of her. And there's something a little bit pointed, and maybe I took it not in the way it was intended, but there's something that I found deliciously pointed about, when she's talking to Abena and, says to her,
I was busy in a different story that might be finished one day.
Which some people might take as like a sign that Russell RTD, the current showrunner, intends to actually do more with the fugitive doctor. And like, well, we have to, be sure her story is told. I'm not taking it as that. Like, if it happens, great. I'm taking it more as just an open acknowledgement that, boy, is there not a complete story for her. It almost feels a little bit more, probably unintentionally, but it feels a little bit more like a jab at Chibnall's complete under and misuse of her as a character. And it's funny to think about her because like she does feel very unfinished and incomplete as a narrative, not as a character. She's actually really fully formed as a character. She was fully formed almost as soon as she said, I'm the doctor. It's part of why I freaking love her. And I do want more of her. But the thing is, in terms of number of appearances, definitely, and possibly in terms of raw screen time at this point as well, we've seen more of the fugitive doctor than we did of, say, the War Doctor. But the War Doctor story, to me at least, never felt unfinished or incomplete. Now, there was certainly plenty of room for more stuff to happen, thus Big Finish will be making War Doctor stories till the end of time, but we did see how the War Doctor started and how he ended. So there might be considerable gaps to fill in, but the core of his story, we know what it is. So it still feels far more complete than the fugitive doctor, who we still don't know exactly where she even falls in the doctor's timelines as far as regenerations go. We don't know where she started. We don't know how she ends. We don't know who she regenerated from. We don't know who she regenerated into. There's so much we do not know that it does feel incomplete. And again, Big Finish is probably taking up some of the slack on this. I haven't gotten to the fugitive doctor stuff. I haven't gotten to Big Finish in a while. Look, there's a lot going on. But it does feel a lot more incomplete, and it's interesting to have that acknowledged on the show where she got introduced, and it is a hope for me that we might at least get some of the answers for her on the show as well. And this isn't like, I need the mysteries answered. If you know me, then you know that like there's plenty of stuff I'm happy to have open-ended, but like core questions of just fundamentally who she is and where she fits into the Doctor's life are kind of important. We don't have anything. So I liked the appearance. I thought it was a neat way to get her in there. And just that acknowledgement that her story is very much not yet complete. Yeah. Boy, I feel that. And so I kind of liked having it acknowledged there in that way. So I don't want your overall takeaway to be that I had issues with it. I actually like this a lot. It's just that I want it to have more space and more time. And I don't feel that about every episode that I like. Like my favorite episodes last season were 73 Yards and Dot and Bubble, both of which I would say fit perfectly into the amount of time they had allotted. Now this still works in the amount of time that it had allotted. It doesn't completely fall apart because it's not 2 parts. An example for a story like that, at least for me, is The Doctor's Daughter, which I don't like for a multitude of reasons. But one of the primary problems I have with that is it hinges a lot, especially the ending, on this idea that we have gotten attached to Jenny, but there hasn't been time or space to do that because she's had to share space with Martha returning and getting her own entire subplot, plus the actual main plot of the story, which Jenny is barely involved in and whose presence does not affect this plot at all, really in any way, shape, or form. So that one needed to be a 2-parter because without more room to breathe, it tried to bank on us caring about this character that the episode didn't have time to do. And episodes can get us to care about a character within the runtime of only one episode. Look at Vincent and the Doctor for that. But that has to be a real core focus on the character, honestly, even more so than the plot, which is the case with Vincent and the Doctor. But if you're having these characters share space with plot, to have time for everything to reach its full potential, sometimes you need more time. Not always, but sometimes you do. And this one, I felt it. Again, though, it doesn't fail for not being 2 parts. Like, I think The Doctor's Daughter flatly fails. I think, and I'm not even sure how good it would have been as a 2-parter, but I think it would have helped. This is good, but I see the potential for it to have been so much more if it had been allowed the runtime of 2 episodes to really delve a bit more into Abena and for us to better understand her as a character and her motivation so that that turn doesn't feel like it happens a little bit too fast. And I want more than anything more stories. Because like I said, that Yo-Yo Ma story was gorgeous. Not just like as a story, but it was so beautifully integrated, and it's so hard. Like, I'm somebody who likes stories about stories and the importance of stories, but it's so hard to find stories that do that and are about the importance of stories that don't also valorize the author, the storyteller, the writer. Which is a very natural thing to do, because if you're taking a position, stories really matter, a natural extension of that is, therefore, the people who tell stories are really important. But like, that's where a lot of these things lose me when they go from talking about the importance of stories to valorizing the writer. And the thing is, the villain here is somebody who is annoyed because he wasn't valorized. So this actually is kind of thematically at least getting into the notion of these stories really do matter. And it's not, again, it's not like the episode sides with the idea that he deserved no credit, but I really would love more exploration of this idea of the stories matter, but not necessarily the valorization of writers. And for the record, the reason I tend to not like it when it goes that direction is because, well, it's in a story written by a writer, you know. Writers are the most important people in the universe, and the stories they tell matter more than anything else. Wrote the writer. So as someone who does believe in the power of stories, but who gets real irritated at the valorization of the actual creators of the stories, and that's not to say that like you can't have stories about the actual creators, but like if you're actually talking about stories in the abstract being really important, which is something this is doing along with some other stuff that I really love. Trying to think of an example that isn't Neil Gaiman. Ooh, the movie The Fall. I think that's a story about stories and about the power of stories that doesn't really do a ton to valorize or put up on a pedestal the storyteller himself. So I'll use that as my example. And this is playing in that same area that I love, and I just want more. I just want more. It's still good, but I want more. Well. The story and the engine. What did you think about this one? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living, and also gets you early access to most of the videos that go up on this main channel. Length of early access varies, depends on how far ahead of schedule I am, but it's usually at least a few days. Often it's a week. But even if you can't help me out that way. And YouTube memberships, they have that same benefit. There's some other stuff over on Patreon as well, but like if all you're interested in is early access, YouTube memberships gets you that as well. I never think to plug that. Whatever. But the rest of the normal YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe, they all help. Don't worry too much about it though. What I want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Quite Bearish, Zubin Litfulla, Mara G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Andre, Movie Turtle, Oliver B, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Mary Mello, Becky Sparks, Loki Eris, Pal Barabajoggle, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. And also Toka Blue Hoovian, Auntie 808, and Tracy Scrabbit. If you'd like to hear me try and pronounce your name correctly while these guys chitter in my ears, check out the reward tiers on the Patreon. Yes, I hear you.